Welcome to Black Mental Health Matters. We are streaming live from Tuna Cheki TV, from LinkedIn, GPAN, and also United States of Africa Facebook. Today we're dealing with a very important topic. Mental illness should not be a death sentence. And we're very, very honored to have here Marcia Rigg with us. Marcia Rigg is a panelist dealing with issues on mental health and death in custody. She is the sister of Sean Rigg, and we would like really to have discussions with her today and to see what we can do to address the issue of Black men, Black patients going to the psychiatric institution for treatment and care and ending up dead. Welcome, Marcia.
Welcome, my dear. Thank you very much for having me. Greetings to everybody that's listening.
Greetings. So please introduce yourself. We know you're a social justice advocate, a mental health advocate. You have been doing a lot of campaigning since the death of your brother. The killing of your brother would be the right thing to say. Yes, please introduce yourself and tell us about the wonderful, amazing work that you're doing.
Well, my name is Marcia Rigg. I'm an international activist and public speaker on the issues of mental health and policing. And my brother, who was Sean Rigg, died in the UK in August 2008. I'll show you his picture, which says, "Justice is a right, not a privilege." So this was my really handsome brother, Sean Rigg, who had suffered with mental health for a period of about 20 years. And he had been diagnosed in the system as suffering with acute paranoid schizophrenia. He did not have a past mental health record until he was picked up by United Kingdom police officers in 1988, where he was picked up off the street and taken to a local police station, where he was put in what we called a straitjacket, so a jacket that is tied in like this, and he had been injected at the police station, and he was zombified. I remember seeing him completely zombified. And that's how he entered what we call a revolving door system. Young Black men in the United Kingdom have been dying disproportionately at the hands of the police, usually during what they call a psychotic episode, a crisis. Somebody that is vulnerable, somebody needs urgent medical attention. But what my brother received, and many others, is a death sentence. A death sentence just like George Floyd, where Sean was restrained in the prone position, face down, with excessive force being applied in the neck area. And basically ever since that night, the Thursday, the 21st of August, 2008, when Sean died, I have been campaigning ever since for justice, truth and accountability and justice, not just for my brother, but for many others in the United Kingdom, and to bring awareness that deaths like this happen globally to our people, not just in the United States. It's global.
Exactly. And I think it would be also correct to say that we're dealing with over 500 years of police brutality, racism, violence, which is impacting our people. globally.
I
Thinking
would
about it,
totally
I mean, tell us,
I would just
go
like to
ahead.
add at that point where you say for 500 years, that's a really important comment, because we were enslaved, captured and enslaved, and, chained and put on ships against our will. They were deaths in custody as well, where people died and we
Yes,
were lynched. And this is just in modern terms, hundreds of years later. It's just a modern version where we
still.
are still being captured and being lynched at our necks. So deaths in custody is a long history of hundreds of years. You're right.
Okay, we will do the best we can. We seem to be having network problems. I would like to go back to your brother because often when we hear of cases, we forget that we're talking about loved ones. We're talking of people who we love, brothers, husbands, sisters, mothers. What was your brother like?
Oh, you see how handsome he was? He was very handsome.
Yes,
He was charming and very talented. Sean was a musician
a
and a
musician.
rap artist, and he wrote lyrics about his life. Sean was also a mentor within the Brixton community here in London. Brixton has a long history of police brutality and what they call riots, we call uprisings,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it's one of the most notorious police stations. It's known for that in the United Kingdom. But Sean was so talented, a mentor within the community that was able to manage
Mhm.
his mental health. One of the um, difficulties within the mental health system here in the UK is the issue of medication. I call it
Yeah,
medical restraint, where Sean
yeah.
um, advocated within the system the side effects of the medication, the fact that black men are disproportionately medicated than their white counterparts, and Sean advocated within the system for all these things. But he was also well travelled, and
Yeah.
he travelled to all over Europe. He travelled to Thailand. He travelled to Ethiopia. He travelled to the Caribbean. All of this was during the time of him being under the mental health system. There were occasions
Yeah.
where he would become unwell, but he aimed to live his life, um, even though the system wanted to dumb him down, and sadly in the end the system killed him. But Sean was a
Yeah.
very intelligent, charming young man, and well loved by my family, by the community.
Yes. I think that's important to mention that he was a mental health advocate.
He
Also
was a
talking about the
mentor, a
negative
mentor,
side effects and a mentor, yes, and raising awareness on the side effects of medication. And like you said, it's very unfortunate, but Black people are over medicated. They are less referred for therapy and really overdiagnosed with schizophrenia, where sometimes it's a psychotic depression or other disorders or illnesses. Okay.
but can I just
Um,
interrupt very briefly there? Because in Sean's situation, he didn't have a history of mental health. He just experimented on one occasion um, with drugs like acid or something like that on one occasion, which gave him
okay.
what we call a bad trip, where he was hallucinating and paranoid.
Okay.
And that's when he went onto
Okay.
the streets and he was picked up by the police. So it was only on one occasion. And he entered the mental health
Okay.
system like that.
Okay. Wow. Okay. What happened on this particular night, on the particular day that he was killed?
Yeah, so Sean was living in a hostel, like a halfway house, within the mental health
Mm-hmm.
system. With his care team was the South London and Maudsley Mental Health Trust,
Mm-hmm.
which was SLAM, SLAM for short. And they
Mm-hmm.
recognised that Sean had not been taking his medication, which is a very common system, a very common feature where sometimes they feel so well they don't take the medication because the medication has serious side effects. And so Sean had not taken his medication for a period of 2 months, of which I was unaware of. And we didn't find that out until 4 years later, and during the inquisition into his death. But there was some erratic 999 calls that were being made by the staff at the hostel where Sean lived. You know, he wasn't under any section. He was not um, in a high security unit at all. You know, he wasn't a threat to anybody, and he lived a normal life there. And but you know, he
Mm-hmm.
felt comfortable there. And there was other people that were living there that also suffered with mental health. And because he hadn't taken his medication, by the time of the 21st of August, he was extremely psychotic, and he wasn't able to recognize the staff. And the staff made erratic emergency calls to the police and to the mental health team that was on that Sean that you know that cared for Sean, and who I had a relationship of 20 years. Um, but nobody had contacted me. You know, I had a close relationship where we worked closely with Sean if he didn't take his medication or if he was abroad and so on and so forth. But on this particular day, they didn't. There was no beds available, and they just told the hostel staff to call the police. This was at about around 4:45 in the evening on the 21st of August. And there is CCTV footage where Sean is in a place of safety. He's obviously psychotic because he's caught on camera in and out of the garden of the grounds of where he was living.
Mm-hmm.
But the police refused to come because they said he hadn't done anything criminal, and that it, you know, they don't deal with they don't deal with mental health cases. Eventually, Sean left the hostel and went onto the streets, very psychotic, at just after 7 p.m. He was naked from the waist up and showed all the indications that it was somebody that was suffering from mental health, that was very vulnerable. He was in and out of traffic, doing karate stances in the street, and members of the public could see categorically that it was somebody that was unwell, and he was a danger to himself and or a danger to the public. Nobody was hurt on that day. He was kicking out two members of the public, but he didn't make any contact with the public, and nobody was
Mm-hmm.
hurt. A 999 call, emergency call, was made by a member of the public to the police, and eventually the police arrived. And he was arrested at 7:40 p.m. You know, it's caught on camera where he's on the street, he's actively psychotic, he's dressed inappropriately. But at the time when he was apprehended, there was no CCTV, and the police officers were not wearing body worn cameras. In 2008, there was no such thing as body worn cameras or cameras in police vehicles. But I since campaigned for that, and we do now have that. That's how we saw George Floyd died, because they were wearing body worn cameras. So we don't have any footage of the actual restraint, but they were witnesses. And somebody actually took two very important photographs which
Mm-hmm.
depicted the restraint and showed clearly that Sean was in the same position, face down in grass, with an officer at, near this Eck area. So he applied pressure towards Sean's back. The medical evidence showed that there was deep bruising, and his other knee was in Sean's back area. So similar to George Floyd, where you saw Chauvin with his two knees on George's back. It was the same with Sean, where the officer had an arm and a knee in Sean's back. He was in this position, and he had also been restrained in the rear stack position at the back, and he was no threat to anybody. Somebody took the photograph in the space of 4 minutes gap, and he was still in the same position. Whereas the understanding of police training, when somebody is vulnerable, somebody that's actively psychotic, if you put somebody in that position for X amount of minutes, obviously they're going to suffocate. If you put a pillow over somebody's face for at least 4 minutes, that person can die, right? But the jury at the inquest found that this was for 8 minutes in this position, and there was excessive force, obviously. I call it deadly force. He was then brought up and taken to the van, the police vehicle. He would have been in and out of consciousness. The officers claimed that he was sort of leaning because he was assisted by officers. He didn't walk by himself, but he was put in the back of a vehicle where they said that he was sitting up, and then he slid down into the footwell area. So in the back of this particular police vehicle was a cage inside the vehicle, a caged area where there was Perpex material, so the officers could literally look at him like I'm looking at you now in the camera. And they claimed that Sean was in a very small, cramped area on his back, with his feet up in the air, spinning 360 degrees, walking his legs on the cage wall, while the officers sped back at speed, back to the police station, not to a hospital, but to a police station, on their blues and twos. No, it's an emergency. Why are they speeding back? Because they arrested him for theft of his own passport. So Sean was only carrying his passport in his pocket and some money. And in the photograph that the witness took, you can see that he'd been searched and his shoes had been removed. So there was another officer at Sean's, pinning down Sean's feet, and his shoes and his passport is beside his feet. Because one thing that Sean always carried with him, if he was abroad, and if he happened to become psychotic, he would always carry his passport that had his name in it, and I would be contacted. Brixton police officers claimed that they didn't believe that the person in the passport was the person that they had arrested. And so they arrested him for theft of his own passport, assault on a police officer, which no witness saw, and a public order offence. They claim that they did not recognize that Sean
we have
had mental health issues. Sorry?
A brother who is in a mental health crisis. We have a brother who is in a mental health emergency situation, and he is being criminalized and arrested and treated in ways which are totally inappropriate. What qualifies?
Absolutely.
How could one recognize an emergency, a mental health emergency?
Well, in Sean's particular case, and what came out in the investigations, there are 6 indicators of somebody that you have to conduct a risk assessment to look at the risks, and the police should have done that. So 1, he wasn't speaking. 2, he was behaving bizarrely in the street. Bizarrely, he was in and out of traffic. That's not normal behavior. He was dressed inappropriately because he was naked from the waist up. and it wasn't appropriate for the time of the evening, you know, and it wasn't that hot. It was a bit hotter in the day, but it wasn't at that time. He was dressed inappropriately. He would have been
Disorientated.
staring, you know. So these are indications of mental health. But also, he carried his passport, and it had his name in it. And if they had done a check, you know, radio to the station and checked his name on the computer database, they would have known that it was somebody that had a record of mental health, mental illness. So that's why I believe that it was obvious that he suffered with mental health, but they arrested him for theft of his own passport, because you recall there were some emergency 999 calls that were made for 3 hours, and the officers claimed that they didn't marry up the 999 calls with the name in the passport. They should have married up the calls, but they claim that they didn't, and I believe that was the start of the cover-up, to separate the fact that they knew who he was and they knew that he suffered with mental health.
So it seems we're having network problems. Marcia?
I can hear you, yes. I can't now. It's frozen.
So Marcia Rigg was just giving us some of the indicators that someone is having an emergency, a mental health emergency, which should have been noticed by the police. They're supposed to screen for that. Can you hear me?
I can now, but I couldn't before. I can't hear you.
So the police did not do the screening.
No, they did not do a risk assessment at the time. They said he was being violent.
Oh, I can't hear you.
And that he had stolen this passport. Sorry? Can you hear me?
Please continue.
Can you hear me? Yes, so there was indications, but their account is that they didn't recognize he was somebody with mental health, that he was being violent, that he had stolen a passport. This was a cancelled passport, by the way. You could tell that it was a cancelled passport, so even if it had been stolen, nobody could use it. And they sped back to the station, to the police station, which was a few minutes. It's now 7:53. He was arrested at 7:40. It's now 7:53, and he arrives in the station yard, where he's kept in the back of the police vehicle for 11 minutes. And the sergeant in charge claimed that he went to the van and he looked at Sean, and he was sitting up, and he looked at him directly in the eye. But we proved years later that he did nothing of the sort. The truth was that Sean was probably in and out of consciousness, and he was dying. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
So, Marcia, can you hear
Yes,
me?
I can now. Yes. I'm
You
not
can
sure if
hear
you can
me.
hear me.
Okay. So, we're going to try to figure this out. I can't hear you. We're having network problems.
Okay.
Um, so, how does a family deal with that kind of trauma? Where do you get the strength, the resources, the resilience to keep on fighting to get over? I don't think it's possible to get over this sort of tragedy, is it?
No, you can't because there is no justice. There's nobody who's made accountable. The fact that the deaths continue, you know, decades later, they are traumatizing. The fact that, for instance, when I watched, when I saw the video of George Floyd, it just brought it all back. So it's very traumatizing. The fact that families are given decomposed bodies for burial, the fact that body parts are removed. Sometimes families are unaware of that. This is all really traumatic. The fact that you go to an inquest to find out how your loved
So
one
can you
died.
come?
Pardon? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I hear you.
I don't know if you can hear me. The fact that families are given decomposed bodies for burial.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And body parts are removed, such as brains and heart are removed. And I know that there's families that their loved ones have been buried without their body parts and they were not aware of it. This is all really traumatic. The fact that sometimes the state the state
Yes.
seizes the body and they say the body belongs to them. Some families have not received their loved ones back for 18 months or 12 months, and they can never say goodbye to their loved one because obviously the body is decomposed. This is all traumatic, which families just never get over. It's not just black men. It's also, they also kill their own, and they do, but it's just disproportionality of black men. So this is very traumatic for families. And the fact that nobody is made accountable, you're just constantly angry. The fact that you keep meeting new families, so nothing has changed, um, is disheartening. But you have to, because you want to know what happened to your loved one, you want to find out. Everybody wants to know what happened. You have to campaign and advocate. And I'm just one of those people that's been able to keep going for the last 13 years. And that has been difficult because, it's very taxing and it's costly to your well-being. It's a very costly thing um, to keep doing. But the fact that the deaths still keep happening, it's important to keep speaking about it to bring awareness of these deaths and globally. And that's why I do the work that I do. We'll never bring Sean back. And I don't know if a man will ever go to prison for it. But because there is no justice, there's just us. But it's vital. If our ancestors that we spoke about earlier didn't keep fighting for our freedom, we'd still be, chained and enslaved. And so it's important to keep going the struggle. That's the story of our life as Black people. You just cannot give up because we do it for our future generation. And we're almost there, you know, because there's an old Jamaican saying, time is longer than rope. I believe their rope is really finished, and it's now time for equal rights and justice. It is time. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing with families, how you support each other, and in this type of situation. Are there some form of therapy, self-care methods which one can implement, strategies which one can implement when such a tragic situation occurs?
The system in the United Kingdom does not afford anything whatsoever in terms of well-being or finance to the family. Whereas agents of the state, like mental health, nurses and psychiatrists and police, get unlimited funding from the public purse to the tune of millions. So one of the things that's really important for families is the fact that we don't get funding to find out how our loved one dies, and we are heavily means tested. Like, for instance, in my particular case, they wanted £21,000 from my family for us to find out how Sean died, to be represented at an inquest. So in the UK, we have what's called an inquest, which is a coroner's court. It's not a criminal court, but it's the inquest, the coroner, to find out the circumstances surrounding the death and to find out the cause of death. And even though a jury can find criminality, where, like in Sean's case, it was a very critical, damaging narrative verdict, which found that the actions of the officers contributed to Sean's death, and also the mental health care team trust had also contributed to Sean's death because they knew that he hadn't been taking his medication. And so for families, there's the issue of funding, and some people have lost all their savings and their pensions and so on. In terms of their well-being, again, there is nothing that the system or the government offers to the families in any way, shape or form. And it is the families themselves that have to support each other. So we have a campaign called the United Families and Friends campaign, which is a coalition of families whose loved ones have died at the hands of the state, being police, mental health units or prisons. It was initially set up just over 20 years ago by Black families following the death of somebody called Joy Gardner, who died in the 90s, who was taped with 13 feet of tape around her face in front of her 5-year-old child. And the officers claimed that she was so strong, she had superhuman strength, she could throw the officers around the room. They set up with some other families the United Families and Friends campaign, which supports the families, and we march to Downing Street, the residence of the Prime Minister, yearly. And recently we work with the charity Inquest, which is the only independent charity that provides legal free advice for families in the United Kingdom to be represented legally. And currently they have a family reference group within the charity Inquest, of which I sit on. And one of the things that we're currently doing at the moment is looking at the well-being of families and taking care of ourselves and sharing our experiences. And some families can try to get counselling via their doctor, their GP, but it's nothing. We don't get bereavement counselling in any way, shape, or form from the government, and so that's why we continuously traumatized without any accountability or justice.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just read some comments. We have Maiden Mercuria sending greetings. Tracy Henry says, how can you trust the enemy? Yeah. So yeah, I think there she's talking about the fact again that we as Black people, we already face the stigma in the community. And when we do go to the institutions where we're supposed to get care and treatment, we end up dead sometimes. Yeah, we do not get the adequate care and treatment, and going up to the fact that people are being criminalized and killed. So what do you do? I mean, Sean was in a place of safety, one would think, in a place of care, and at the time they haven't even informed the family that he was having a crisis. So I think maybe it's very important that families.
When they came to tell the family on the night about 2 o'clock in the morning, they came to the house and they said that our brother had just suddenly collapsed, became unwell and suddenly collapsed and died. They did not know what happened. They wanted us to sign a medical release form because they wanted us to find out about his medical record. They wanted to know if he was sick. They would not let us identify his body that night because they said that his body belonged to the state and he was in a body bag and his body was evident. And they offered his passport, the very same passport that they said he'd stolen, but we didn't know that on the night, to identify him. So from the very beginning, we were, you know, we were speculating. And then eventually they didn't want us to see the body until 6 days later, but we argued and we got to see him on the Saturday morning. But he was behind a locked glass window. You know, we weren't able to touch him and we could only see one side of his face. And we made up a lot of noise and eventually they had to unbolt this room. And when we went into the room, there were injuries to his face, you know, that we had not been told about. You know, he had received an autopsy by the state. We've never ever seen Sean's body because when we went to identify him, he'd already had the autopsy. So we never saw his body to this day. And that's what happens to other families. It's crazy.
So unfortunately, apart from dealing with the tragic circumstances of the death and the trauma, you also have to find the energy to go against the state that is in a cover-up. You have to try to get the funds to get legal
representation. hear you.
Here we have you are very strong, Marcia. I salute you. We have to keep going.
Thank you. I salute you all back.
And
Thank you very
also,
much.
greetings from Mash Mohammed Fatih.
Greetings, my brother.
So I'm really sorry that the network is having such problems, that we're having such instability. It makes it difficult because there's a delay, and I'm trying to listen to you through another device. So sometimes while you're not, there's a huge delay in that. So we're just trying to work it out somehow.
Yes, I
Um,
realize that there is a delay.
one important aspect which I would like to know from you is, what role can the community play? What role can the community play? Because we as Black people, people of African descent, we face different challenges. And what role can we play?
Well, first of all, it is important for platforms such as this to bring awareness globally. So that's the first thing. You know, in the United Kingdom, most of the people, you know, the nurses and everybody are Black. You know, we are the ones that are in the system. We could do this for ourselves and provide the necessary services ourselves, I believe, because police have no business in dealing with somebody that is psychotic and extremely unwell. You know, what we need is a community service where we do not call the police, and, you know, we call on our community. You know, it's important that we have discussions. There's so many other discussions, you know, that we can have. But basically, you know, it's changing the mindsets of these people. I don't know if that will ever happen. But we need to provide the services to ourselves, because they're just not going to do it for us. So it's really important that we unite. It's important that we look at other countries perhaps that may have, you know, use a system that works. I'm not aware of any. And just for us to support each other, to keep our loved ones out of the mental health system. I don't know the answer fully, but for the powers that be to see that we are uniting internationally, because they always try to separate the cases individually. You know, they separate the circumstances, but collectively, it's quite apparent and clear that the patterns are identical. You know, Latoya, I met you in Hamburg a couple of years ago, and met other families. The patterns are identical. So it's identifying the patterns, and globally, we can have a collective action to bring about real change, and to put this to put the state on trial.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so very true. I mean, it's unfortunate sometimes here, for example, we still have brothers and sisters with mental illness going in to institutions alone, and nobody goes to visit. Nobody follows the treatment which they are being given, and they're alone. And so many even die, and they're just buried anonymously. So it's really
Right.
important, I think, that you brought up that point, that we as a community have to build our own services, organizations, and pay attention to mental health care as providers. Also, utilizing our own our own concepts, our own traditional concepts, to move in more from medication to what brings about healing. What brings about
Absolutely.
healing.
That's correct. Absolutely. That's really important. And also, some people in our community globally do not recognize mental illness and think that it's some sort of curse, you know. And but mental health is real. And some people find it easier to cope with certain things in life than others, but collectively that support is detrimental to our future, because they really want to label us as big, bad, and dangerous, and that we're violent. We're not madder than anybody else, and we're not stronger than anybody else. They're basically just killing us. It's modern day lynching. So we'd have to just keep away from these people, because we're the one that keeps up the system for them. We're the ones that are doing the work, but it's the white, psychiatrists that are up there that's giving us the medication. So we need to do it ourselves and not involve these people.
Thank you. And
It's
in
also
terms of
important.
advocacy, what policy changes um, do we need? And what has been, I know, for example, there have been some successes already in the UK, haven't there? There have been some policy changes, and um, there are still things we have to push for.
Yes, absolutely. So there's been over 2,000 deaths in police custody in the United Kingdom since 1969. Okay, zero convictions. We just had the first conviction, in fact, in the United Kingdom last week for the death of Dalian Atkinson, and a police officer went to prison for 8 years. Certainly not enough years um, for killing that person. But sorry, I forgot the question. Why I said that. Oh yeah, so in England, there have been some really important reports in Sean's case, so and others like Ossalani Lewis, where he died 2 years after Sean, again under the South London and Maudsley mental health trust, where he was restrained for up to 45 minutes with 11 police officers in a place of safety. And we have now what's called Senny's law. It's about the Mental Health Use of Force Act. So what we're trying to do here in the UK the fact that they use the fact that they try to say that when somebody's psychotic, they use the word excited delirium, or acute behavioral disturbance, causes the death. It's nonsense, and that the restraint had nothing to do with it. So the family of Osaleni Lewis, Adji Lewis, who I believe was on your show a few weeks ago, and I worked together closely, and another family called Kevin Clark, where recently there was a very damaging report. Again, he was under the South London and Maudsley as well, psychotic, and the officers were wearing body-worn cameras, and you could hear him saying, I can't breathe, and you're killing me. In fact, that case in the United Kingdom recently, there was a United Nations report.
Yes.
So there's some very important reports. We've got the Angelini review. We've got Seni's law. Angelini looked at the way that investigations happen and the issue of race and racism in the United Kingdom, the disproportionality of black men dying in mental health. And it was families like me and Adji Lewis and many others that advocated for this, and we got it legally in our cases. And last week, there was a United Nations report on the issues of police brutality and the fact that officers have acted with impunity globally following. And so this review was following the death of George Floyd, in which I personally gave evidence to the High Commissioner and met the other families, George Floyd, the mother of Breonna Taylor, and other families in Brazil and so forth. The report came out. You can look at it online. All these are public documents where the United Nations has also said that, officers have acted with impunity for decades globally. And so it is my argument that what more do they need? They have been put on trial, but there just needs a simple act of a political willingness to make officers accountable, so it sends a clear message when they kill somebody or murder somebody that they can go to prison. And until then, there will be no change whatsoever, and the deaths will continue. How can that be? How can they use deadly force? Because currently they have a license to kill. But this cannot go on forever because of our future generation. And that's why it's important to advocate, to speak out, for the families to collectively, to legally challenge the judicial system with the very important reports that we have. Not just in the UK, globally, we have the United Nations report.
I think that says it all, the license to kill. As long as they are not held accountable, as long there's no pressure and they're not held accountable, then it continues. So this is why really we're so grateful for the work you're doing. The impact is definitely there. You're raising awareness, you're making a change, and it's definitely not easy. Yeah, but we are inspired. We're inspired by your work, and thank you so
very
much.
This is a spiritual journey for me. I was given this job to do, and I tried to do it gracefully with maximum impact. It's just that the Most High gave me a job to do, and so I'm just doing it.
So we're about coming to the end of this show, and I would really like to ask you to, make a closing statement.
A closing statement to my people. Time is longer than rope. The rope always has an end to it, but time evolves forever. And it is now time for justice, for my people, because we have to cling on to hope. And currently, globally, we are winning, and Babylon is falling. No justice, no peace. We do this for our children's children's children, and we will pass on the baton just like our ancestors did. And I think the powers that be cannot fathom why we just don't give up. So my statement today is never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, give up. Because in the end, we shall win. We are the first and we shall be the last. Amen.
Thank you so much for this empowering closure to the program today. No justice, no peace. We keep on hanging in there no matter what, as we did today, despite all the technical hitches. Mental Health Matters. It's the 1-year anniversary. Please continue to follow up and see the great work that has been started here. Check out GPAN, Global Pan-Africanism Network. We're organizing, we're coming together, working hard on the issues with passion. And we thank you all for being there today. Thank you.
Thank you.